Next, we'll delve into mood disorders. These are disorders like major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, as well as various variations of those types of disorders. What is your mood? People often confuse this with emotion. Mood and emotion are connected, but they are distinct things. Your mood is going to not just be whatever emotion you're experiencing, it's the predominant emotion that you experience across a period of time. So the focus here is that this is that persistent feeling that you have. An emotion like anger might be, you have this flash of red, you have this flash of anger, it motivates you to perhaps rectify an unfair situation, to get someone to treat you fairly. But then that's different from being angrily in a mood, where generally you're kind of angry at the world, you're angry at someone persistently, but you're still kind of clear-headed. It's just you may be likely to act in an angry way within any given circumstance. So it's almost a preparation for experiencing a certain emotion, even though you may not be experiencing that emotion intensely in that moment. So it's persistent. Emotions are often temporary. Moods persist across time. Your mood is something that does prepare you for what's happening around you. When you're in a happy mood, when you're in a pleasant mood, what that does is it prepares you to feel happy in any given situation, right? If you are at a birthday party, it's probably a good thing that you're in a happy mood. You'll then be willing to socialize with people, to tell jokes, to give presents, to play games. A happy mood is going to facilitate that. Versus if you're in a sad mood, what that might motivate you to do is sit, relax, reflect, maybe take care of yourself, do something that you need in that moment because you're feeling relatively kind of sadder. You may not be actively crying, you may not be actively feeling like the worst you ever had, but you're prepared to feel a certain way for an extended period of time. This is helpful. It prepares you for things that you need. When you are in a sad mood, you may actually need to take care of yourself. You may need to do something to self-care. The problem with a mood disorder is when these moods persist for a very, very long time, when they are potentially extreme, that is, the mood is so extreme that it might be debilitating to the degree that you feel it, and then it's possibly recurrent. That is, it happens again and again and again. So maybe your mood is, perhaps if you are, say, have a major depressive disorder, your mood may be depressed, you may be relatively more sad for a long period of time, and you come out of that, but then maybe shortly thereafter you go right back into that mood. And so again and again and again you experience that mood. These are the circumstances that could lead to the diagnosis of a mood disorder. So extreme emotional state that is persistent and or recurrent. The one that is most well known, and probably because you're most likely to experience at some point in your life, is major depressive disorder. This used to be called major depression, but it has been updated from that. This is, as you would expect, often sudden and severe sadness, but it's not just that. And in fact, that's really not the worst part of major depressive disorder. The worst part is usually that people experience a decreased pleasure in normal activities. They may feel tired. There's often some kind of weight change associated with either gaining weight for some people or losing weight for others. And it really depends on how you may be trying to overcome the feeling that you're having. Some people just lose interest in eating food. Some people eat more in order to alleviate the low mood that they're experiencing. And of course, in extreme cases, you might have thoughts of suicide. Well, what does this look like actually? When you are depressed, certainly you are sad, but really the hallmark is when you try to pull yourself out of that, it can be extremely difficult because what you normally do to feel good is you do something that is pleasant. Maybe you're the person who loves video games, so you've had a tough day, you're not feeling that great, so I'm going to play this video game in order to feel better. Or I'm going to hang out with my friends to help lighten my mood. Well, with major depressive disorder, what can happen is as you attempt to do these things that usually pull you out of that sadness, they don't work. Playing that video game is not as pleasurable as it usually is. Hanging out with your friends is not as pleasurable. Perhaps eating is not as pleasurable. So what you might do is, say, eat to excess to gain weight, or you figure, you know what, there's no point in hanging out with my friends because I'm not really enjoying it anyway. So the problem is that you can get stuck there. The problem is you can get stuck because what normally brings you out of that low mood is not bringing you there anymore. That's the worst part of major depressive disorder for most people. It's not just feeling depressed. It's not just being sad. The hallmark of major depressive disorder is that it needs to persist nearly every day. And in the DSM-5, the classification is that this usually needs to persist for about 6 months. Now, that's a long time. And you may be in a major depressive state for earlier than that and wish to seek help earlier than that. And that's, of course, fine. But for diagnosis, the cutoff is usually 6 months. To be in this persistent state of what's called anhedonia, not finding pleasure in normal activities for 6 months, can be an extremely stressful experience. It's often comorbid with an anxiety disorder as well, which makes sense. As I've mentioned before, if you are not feeling pleasure in response to normal activities that you're going through, that can be paired with a certain amount of worry about the future. Am I ever going to feel better? As I'm feeling depressed, I may be neglecting some of my schoolwork, I may be neglecting my friends, and so you begin to worry about how well you're doing in school or how well you're upkeeping your relationships with your friends. So often comorbid with an anxiety disorder. Something that you'll often see, especially in more northern climates, where the sun is not always out shining, is something called seasonal affective disorder. So these are depressive episodes that occur during the winter months. During the winter, the sun is less likely to be out. The clouds are likely to be covering it, and as we know, if you are exposed to less light than usual, that is likely going to influence your sleep-wake cycle. If you are not exposed to as much light, you'll be producing relatively more melatonin than you otherwise produce. Well, if you're producing more melatonin, you might actually be your body might be telling you to sleep more, to not be as active as it otherwise would be. And the other problem with this is, remember that your sleep is a cycle. It's a regulated cycle of your body being on and being off for a while. And if you are inconsistently receiving light cues from outside, maybe sometimes it's sunny, but other times it's dark and it's cloudy and it's you're not getting that light exposure, what that might do is it might dysregulate your sleep cycle, whereby your sleep cycle is not regular, and therefore if it's not regular, you may not be getting that REM sleep or that deep sleep that you need to fully restore yourself. If you're not fully restoring yourself, then that can contribute to other problems you may experience, anxiety that you experience, or to the anhedonia, the lack of pleasure that is characteristic of a depressive episode. So the idea here is your sleep cycle is being disrupted because you're not getting this regular amount of light. There is an easy solution to this, funnily enough, and it's a highly effective solution for anyone who suffers from seasonal affective disorder. and it's these lights that produce artificial UV rays, sunlight. So what you can do is you can actually just go on Amazon, find one of these lamps, and they will be prescription lamps. I believe you can get them without a prescription, but if you go to the doctor, you are diagnosed with this, they'll usually prescribe one of these lamps, such that you put it on your desk, and for a certain amount of time throughout the day, you have this light on so that it is shining at you, that you register that light, and your brain knows, it's daytime, even when it's really cloudy out. You look at that for a while, it gets your melatonin levels decreased because you're being exposed to light. And then at night, when you actually need to start decreasing those melatonin levels, you turn that lamp off. It seems kind of silly, but it works. This is one of those interventions that seems like it's a bunch of hocus pocus, but it actually helps to kind of hijack a lot of that machinery that is responsible for regulating your sleep-wake cycle. Not every light will do this. Many of the lights that you have around your house are probably not creating the same kinds of light that the sun does, and so these are specifically created to mimic that light, and therefore trick your brain into thinking that it's receiving sunlight. Highly recommend this if you suspect that may be a problem for you. All right, major depressive disorder, and those types of depressive disorders are called unipolar disorders. That is, they're characterized by extreme sadness or anhedonia, an inability to experience pleasure. There are a category of mood disorders called bipolar disorders that are characterized by a range of moods spanning from extreme sadness to extreme elation, extreme happiness. And that extreme happiness, these are called manic episodes. Now that sounds really great. Like, okay, well, you are extremely happy. What could possibly be wrong with that? And for a lot of people, those who experience bipolar disorder may actually really enjoy the manic episodes that they have. The problem is a manic episode can often wear you out very quickly. So a state of happiness is going to motivate you to do certain things. But if you feel too much happiness, what can happen is your mind may not be well prepared to carry out or continue continue for a long period of time to accomplish that project that you're working on. So for example, someone with experiencing a manic episode, they may come up to you and say something like, okay, I've got this grand plan. Guys, listen, all of us right now, we're going to go out. This school for a long time has needed a building dedicated specifically to a theater. If we had a theater, the student activities club, the student activities director, they could get all the students in. We could show movies every week. It'd be fine. We could even have like a popcorn stand, and we could have our own theater. Maybe we could even start selling tickets to that theater and get the public in, and then the university would start creating their funds. Well, all we need to do is we need to get a shovel, and then we need to get bricks, and we need to get mortar, and if we put all of our time into this, I bet we could get this done in like a couple of months. I bet if we all work together, if we're all equally into this, it'd be great. So come on, let's go do this. And you start working. All right, we start working on this building, and then perhaps as you get all the materials together, as you start to work on this project, there's then this switch. And instead of being in that manic phase, you have this grand creative plan that is in place, it's ready, then you enter a depressive episode. And now you don't find it as interesting anymore. You don't really want to do it anymore. So what you often see is that people with bipolar disorders are often very creative. They have these manic episodes where they create these very beautiful, elaborate, creative plans. But then once the depressive episodes hit, they then lack the ability to organize those creative thoughts, to actually follow through on them, which can sometimes make it worse because it feels like you created this beautiful thing. The plan is all there. It's just you can't follow through anymore. And so it makes you feel even worse for having gotten people excited about it because nothing ever materializes. This is bipolar disorder. So a lot of people who get treated for bipolar disorder, they do so because it's distressing to be experiencing this fluctuation between the two moods, but there are a lot of people who actually miss the manic episodes because they felt great while they were happening. So a lot of people may actually stop taking medication for bipolar around this for that reason. They want those manic episodes. But often, this is the problem that they experience. They can't actually get stuff done that they plan to get done. All right, what's the etiology of certain mood disorders? The behaviorist perspective, remember, learning. One of the most powerful perspectives on mood disorders is the idea of learned helplessness. And the best way I can describe this is use an example of an experiment this was, again, back when animal experimentation for learning was far less regulated. That is, you could do things to animals that were kind of unethical. They can't do that anymore. There was an experiment where they brought a dog and they put it into, think of those Skinner boxes that we went over back in the learning chapter, where there is an electrified grid floor. There are feeding tubes where you can reward the dog for hitting levers and they get rewarded for doing so. They put a dog into this box that actually had 2 compartments, and separating each compartment was a low wall that the dog could jump over to get to the other side. Well, what they would do is they would alternate electrifying each of those compartments. So the dog would perhaps be resting, it would be at least be up and searching around. They'd electrify that grid underneath, and the dog naturally would go, well, I don't like that doesn't feel good, so it would jump to the other side where the floor was not electrified. While it was there, it would relax, it'd be fine, and then they would electrify that side, de-electrify the other side, and so the dog would go, oh, well, now it's electrified here, I don't want to be here, so it would jump over the wall again to get the safety. After a while, what they then started to do is they would electrify both compartments at once. And the dog would go, I don't want to be here, so it would jump over and go, oh no, I don't want to be here either, so it would jump back and say, oh no, it's electrified everywhere. And the dog would try to escape it for a while. It would kind of pace around, it would not feel good, it would being shocked. But after a while, when they started doing this over and over and over again, what they started to notice is that the dog, when the floor was electrified, would not try to escape. It would simply lay down in a corner and just take that electricity. It knew that no matter what it did, its situation could not be changed. It would continue to be electrified. The dog had developed what was called learned helplessness. No matter what you do, you can't succeed. At the basis of a lot of mood disorders, especially major depressive disorder, this is the kind of learned behavior that can contribute to it. Is you may believe that, say, you go to school, and when you take a class, you try to take, you study, you work on an exam, and you get a low grade. And you go, oh, geez, I got a low grade. I must not have studied very well. And so what you do is you pep yourself up and you say, okay, in the future I'm going to study in this way instead. And then you study that way. You kind of try to revise your study strategies, and you still can't do well. And you go, well, that sucks. I don't want to be digging myself a hole here. So you go and you find a new way to study. You get some advice. You try really hard. You spend hours and hours and hours more studying the night before. You take the exam, and you still get a low grade. What you're starting to do is starting to learn that no matter what you do, nothing's going to change. You can't succeed. So what you might then end up doing is saying to yourself, you know what? There's no point in doing any of this. There's no point in trying, because no matter what I do, I'm always going to be failing on this exam. You apply this to other domains of life. And this is how you can potentially develop major depressive disorder. You have this recurring thought of no matter what I do, it just doesn't really pay off. That's learned helplessness. Part of what contributes to this, again, is the cognitive perspective. You see that behaviorist and cognitive perspectives often complement one another. is negative self-defeating thoughts. This is a hallmark of major depressive disorder. That is, you might be if you can't get out of bed in the morning, you feel like there's not really much worth doing. It might be because you are spinning a narrative to yourself. You are telling yourself a story that I'm just no good at life. I can't have a stable romantic relationship. I can't do well in class. I can't hold a job down. And so you get stuck in this cycle where you are continually telling yourself, I can't do these things. And the more you tell yourself, I can't do these things, the less effort you take at trying to improve them. And so you get stuck in that cycle of continually telling yourself, this just isn't worth it. This isn't going to work out. Those are negative self-defeating thoughts. Escaping those can be very, very difficult, but it's often essential to do so to get through major depressive disorder. And then, of course, we have the biological perspective. We know that a lot of mood disorders seem to be affected by the concentration of neurotransmitters. If you receive some kind of medication for a major depressive disorder, you'll probably be prescribed something that alters serotonin and perhaps norepinephrine, which is that neurotransmitter in charge of general arousal. When you are depressed, you are often sleepier. You may be unwilling to kind of get up and do the things you need to do. So some drugs will influence that. Some will influence dopamine, but often the ones that involve dopamine tend to be addictive because it's dopamine, and so these are often more carefully handled, not prescribed as easily. But serotonin seems to be a big one. Serotonin is going to help in mood regulation, making you feel more even, more relaxed. And then we also know that mood disorders, like anxiety disorders, are heritable. They get passed down through genes. And so if your parents have a mood disorder, you are likely to, you're at least predisposed to develop one as well. All right, that ends mood disorders. The final lecture will be on schizophrenia and schizophrenia spectrum disorders.